They thought she was lost. A fragile, silver-haired woman wandering into a world she didn't belong, a stage meant for prodigies, not pensioners. But when Florence Jenkins lifted her violin that night, everything changed. The conductor smirked. The audience whispered. The young musicians snickered. And then, the first note. By the time she lowered her bow, no one dared to laugh. Because Florence wasn't just an old lady with an instrument, she was a force. But how did a retired school teacher end up shocking an entire theater and silencing a man who tried to humiliate her? This is the story of a woman who refused to fade quietly into the background. A story of music, defiance, and a comeback no one saw coming. Stay tuned, because what happens next, no one was prepared. Rose Mitchell's mornings always began the same way. She would rise at precisely 6. No alarm needed. Her body still tuned to the rhythm of a life long past. The sun filtered softly through lace curtains into a modest living room, where muted photographs lined the shelves, sepia smiles of people who were no longer here. She shuffled toward the kitchen, kettle in hand, filling it with water that never quite reached a rolling boil. Her movements were deliberate, careful. At 68, arthritis whispered in her joints, but it never dared shout. She brewed a single cup of black tea. No sugar, no milk. Setting it beside the same chair by the window, overlooking a sleepy neighborhood that hadn't changed in decades. And there it was. Against the far wall, draped in a faded ivory cloth, stood the grand piano. Its curved silhouette dominated the room, both beautiful and haunting, a relic of another life. Dust settled along the lid like forgotten dreams. Rose hadn't touched those keys in nearly 30 years. She sipped her tea, eyes drifting toward the instrument. But she didn't linger. Not anymore. Not since the night the music stopped. A soft knock at the door broke her reverie. "Rose?" "It's me, Helen," called a familiar voice from outside. Rose opened the door to find Helen Carter standing on the porch, her childhood friend, and a firecracker, even at 70. Helen carried a bright pink tote bag and a folded flyer clutched in her hand. "You're up early," Rose remarked with a faint smile. "I've been up since 5. Couldn't sleep." Helen pushed inside uninvited, waving the flyer excitedly. "You have to see this." Rose took the paper, adjusting her glasses. In bold letters across the top, "International Senior Talent Showcase. Seeking hidden gems. Over 60. They're holding auditions downtown," Helen explained breathlessly. "Televised winners get to perform at Lincoln Center. Imagine." Rose chuckled softly, handing back the flyer. I haven't played in decades. All the more reason to do it, Helen insisted. "You were born for that piano. Remember the recitals, that Chopin nocturne. You brought people to tears. That was a lifetime ago." Rose's gaze flickered toward the piano, then away. "I'm too old for stages." Helen folded her arms defiantly. "Nonsense. You're only as old as you let yourself be. I've heard you, Rose, in the evenings, when you think no one's listening. The music's still in you." Rose's lips pressed into a thin line. She turned back to her tea. "It's too late for all that." Helen sighed, setting the flyer on the table beside the untouched second teacup. "Think about it. You don't have to decide today." When Helen left, the house grew quiet again. Rose carried the flyer to the piano, placing it atop the dusty lid. Her fingers hovered over the cloth, then retreated. She stared at the faded keys beneath. Memories swirling concert halls, thunderous applause. Thomas's proud smile in the front row. "Not today," she whispered. But that night, long after the town had fallen asleep, the cloth was gone. And from the small house on Maple Street, soft notes of a piano drifted into the dark, tentative at first, then growing stronger as if waking from a very long sleep. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains, illuminating the piano where the cloth had been neatly folded on a chair. Rose sat at the bench, her hands resting in her lap, eyes fixed on the keys. Her fingers still tingled from last night's quiet, hesitant playing. A knock came again, more urgent this time. Helen burst in before Rose could answer, cheeks flushed with excitement. "I knew you'd play again," Helen exclaimed, spotting the uncovered piano. "I heard it." Rose. I sat outside on the porch and listened. Rose's cheeks colored faintly. "It wasn't much. My hands aren't what they used to be." Helen waved that off. "Oh, please. You sound better than half the performers I've seen on TV." She pulled another flyer from her tote bag. "Look, I signed you up." Rose's brow furrowed. "You... what?" Helen held up both hands, grinning mischievously. "I knew you wouldn't do it yourself, so I did it for you. Auditions are in 3 days." Rose stared at her friend, part horrified, part amused. "Helen Carter, you're incorrigible." "I prefer determined," Helen corrected proudly. "And before you say no, listen, this is more than some silly competition. It's a chance to show them to show yourself that it's not too late." Rose's gaze drifted back to the piano. "I don't even know what I'd play." "Play what's in your heart," Helen urged gently. "You've been holding it in for too long." For a long moment, Rose said nothing. Then, almost shyly, "Will you come with me?" Helen's face softened. "Of course. Every step." That night, Rose sat at the piano again. This time, she didn't hesitate. Her fingers found an old favorite, Debussy's Clair de Lune, and the notes floated gently through the house like whispers from the past. She stumbled at first, but as the melody unfolded, her touch grew surer, her posture straighter. In the doorway, Helen watched quietly, a hand pressed to her chest. By midnight, Rose closed the lid softly, exhaustion pulling at her. But inside, something had awakened a tiny ember she hadn't felt in years. The day of the audition arrived with a crisp breeze and a sky washed clean from last night's rain. Helen picked up Rose early, fussing over her hair and makeup, insisting on a touch of lipstick. "I feel ridiculous," Rose muttered as they drove downtown. "You look radiant," Helen countered. "Let them see the artist you are." The theater was grander than Rose expected. Velvet curtains, chandeliers, a polished Steinway gleaming under the lights. Young contestants paced nervously, clutching sheet music and instruments. Some glanced curiously at Rose as she entered, a silver-haired woman among a sea of youthful ambition. A young woman at the registration table smiled politely. "Are you here to accompany someone, ma'am?" "I'm here to audition," Rose replied, lifting her chin slightly. The woman blinked, then smiled wider. "Wonderful. Please sign here." Helen squeezed Rose's hand. "I'll be right out here." Inside the audition hall, rows of empty seats loomed before her, At the judges' table sat three figures, middle-aged professionals with sharp eyes and tighter smiles. One leaned forward, scanning her form. Mrs. Mitchell, is it? What will you be playing? Rose's hands trembled slightly as she opened her sheet music. Debussy, Clair de Lune. The judges exchanged glances. A bold choice, one murmured. Rose seated herself, took a deep breath, and placed her hands on the keys. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then she began. The opening notes shimmered softly, delicate as morning light. And as the music unfolded, Rose's world narrowed to the keys beneath her fingertips, and the sound rising from them, every note a memory, every phrase a testament. She wasn't playing for the judges. She was playing for herself, for Thomas, for the girl she once was. And as the last chord faded, the silence that followed was deeper than applause. When the final note melted into silence, Rose let her hands fall gently into her lap. Her chest rose and fell with quiet breaths. The weight of the moment pressed down, but oddly, she felt light, like something long trapped inside had finally been set free. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Then a cough, a shuffle of papers. The judge in the middle leaned forward, peering at her over half-moon glasses. Mrs. Mitchell, that was... He hesitated, as if searching for the right words. Unexpected. Rose's lips quirked into a faint smile. Unexpected good, or unexpected bad. A ripple of soft laughter from the other judges. Technically, the woman to his right chimed in. It wasn't flawless, but... She tapped her pen thoughtfully. It had heart. The third judge, a younger man with spiky hair and a skeptical frown, flipped through her paperwork. You haven't performed publicly in how long? 40 years, Rose answered simply. He raised his eyebrows. And you pick Clair de Lune? Rose shrugged lightly. It's been waiting in me all that time. He set the papers down, exhaling through his nose. Brave. The middle judge nodded. You surprised us today, Mrs. Mitchell. We weren't expecting... Well, this. Rose stood, gathering her sheet music. I didn't come to surprise you, she said gently. I came to surprise myself. Behind the judges, a door creaked open. Helen peeked in, face tight with nervous hope. Well, she mouthed. Rose offered a small thumbs up, though she wasn't sure yet what she meant. The middle judge cleared his throat. Results will be posted online tomorrow. But between us, he allowed himself a rare smile. I hope you'll be on that stage next month. As Rose stepped off the stage, Helen rushed to meet her, nearly knocking her sheet music from her hands. Tell me everything, Helen demanded. Rose laughed, feeling years peel off with the sound. They didn't throw tomatoes. I count that as a win. Helen's grin widened. I thought, that's not an answer. They listened, Rose admitted, her voice softening. Really listened. Outside, the afternoon sun glinted off wet sidewalks. A breeze carried the distant sound of a street musician playing a jaunty tune. Rose paused, closing her eyes for a moment, letting the warmth touch her face. You did it, Helen said quietly beside her. I did something, Rose replied. I don't know yet what it means. Back at home, Rose set the violin case carefully on the piano bench, staring at it for a long moment. The apartment felt different now, brighter, somehow, though nothing had physically changed. She glanced at the old photograph of Thomas on the mantel. "Well," she murmured, "I didn't faint. I didn't run. You'd be proud of me. Love." The phone rang, breaking the quiet. Helen's excited voice crackled through the line. They just posted it. You're in, Rose. You made it." Rose blinked. What? You're performing at the gala. You did it." A strange mix of elation and fear swirled in Rose's chest. "Oh, Helen, what have you gotten me into?" Helen laughed. "Into the spotlight, where you belong." As Rose hung up, she stared again at the violin case. Her reflection was faintly visible in the glossy wood. "I guess we're not done after all," she whispered. And in that moment, a spark glowed bright in her chest, a spark that had waited patiently, quietly, through the long years. This time, she was ready to let it burn. The Grand Harmony Theater shimmered under the night sky, its golden lights casting a warm glow over the red carpet leading to its entrance. Inside, the lobby buzzed with excitement. Men in tuxedos, women in glittering gowns, glasses of champagne clinking as laughter rippled through the air. Rose stood just beyond the velvet curtain backstage, clutching her violin so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Her name was printed on the evening's program, Rose Mitchell, violin soloist, but it still felt surreal. Only a month ago, she was playing alone in her tiny apartment. Now, she was about to perform for hundreds of strangers. "You okay, Mrs. Mitchell?" Sophie peeked around the curtain, her own violin slung casually over her shoulder. Rose swallowed hard. "No," she forced a shaky smile. "But I'm going out there anyway." Sophie grinned. "Zets, the CYO's a mededy. Ataridia for stay the spirit." The announcer's voice boomed over the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Rose Mitchell." A polite round of applause followed. Rose took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage. The lights blinded her for a moment. The sea of faces stretched out into the darkness beyond the footlights. An endless audience watching, waiting. Somewhere in the front row, she spotted Helen waving excitedly. She positioned her violin under her chin, feeling the familiar press of the wood against her jaw. The pianist gave her a small nod. It was time. As the opening bars of Claire de Lune floated softly from the piano, Rose closed her eyes and let the music guide her. Her bow met the strings, trembling slightly at first. But then, as the melody unfolded, her hand steadied. Each note glistened like a drop of dew under moonlight, delicate yet sure. The auditorium seemed to hold its breath. Her heart raced, but with each phrase, the nervousness gave way to something deeper, something fierce. This wasn't just a performance. This was her story. Every ache of loss, every lonely evening, every quiet triumph etched into each vibrating string. A few rows back, Anton Jennings sat stiffly in his seat, arms crossed, expression unreadable. But Rose didn't play for him. She played for Thomas, for Helen, for the little girl she'd once been, dreaming of concert halls and spotlights. As the final, haunting chord faded into silence, a hush blanketed the theater, then applause. It began tentatively, then grew, until the entire hall rang with cheers and clapping. People rose from their seats. some whistling, some wiping away tears. Rose blinked, overwhelmed. The standing ovation stretched on, folding her into its warmth. She bowed once, twice, then a third time, each gesture deeper than the last. Behind her, the pianist whispered, "They love you." Rose turned, her voice hoarse but steady. "No, tonight, they loved the music." As she walked off stage, Sophie threw her arms around her. "You killed it. Did you see them standing?" Rose chuckled, breathless. "I saw in the dressing room." She sat quietly, unwrapping her violin, her hands finally relaxing. The cheers still echoed faintly through the walls. Helen burst in moments later, tears shining in her eyes. "You were magnificent." Rose looked down at her instrument, then up at her friend. "I didn't know I still had this in me." Helen squeezed her hand. "You never lost it. You just needed a reason to remember." Rose smiled, feeling that glow in her chest again, brighter now, steady and sure. The spotlight no longer frightened her. It welcomed her. And for the first time in years, she was ready to step into it fully. The gala reception was in full swing when Rose stepped into the grand hall, her violin case slung over one shoulder. Chandeliers sparkled overhead. Waiters glided between clusters of guests with trays of champagne and delicate hors d'oeuvres. Everywhere she turned, people smiled, nodded, or stopped to praise her performance. "Mrs. Mitchell, you were breathtaking tonight," a well-dressed woman gushed, pressing her hand warmly. "I haven't heard a solo played with such soul in years." Rose smiled politely, murmuring thanks. Compliments drifted around her like petals on water, beautiful, fleeting, and somehow distant. The adrenaline from the performance had begun to fade, leaving a strange, hollow ache in its place. Sophie hurried over, cheeks flushed with excitement. "Diana Fraser wants to meet you. She's been looking for you since the encore." Diana Fraser. Rose blinked. "The Arts Foundation director." Sophie nodded vigorously. "She's talking to Jennings right now." "Come on." Rose hesitated but let Sophie tug her across the ballroom. Near the far wall, Anton Jennings stood in deep conversation with a regal woman in a navy gown. His posture was rigid, lips pressed thin. As they approached, Diana turned and lit up with a warm smile. "There she is!" Diana exclaimed. "Rose Mitchell, you are a revelation." Jennings's jaw visibly tightened. Rose inclined her head modestly. "Thank you, Miss Osko." "Fraser, that means a great deal." "No, thank you," Diana replied earnestly. "You reminded us tonight what music is supposed to be. Not flawless technique, not empty perfection, but heart, passion, humanity." She paused, her gaze appraising but kind. "Tell me, Rose, have you ever considered teaching again?" Rose blinked. "Teaching? We're launching a mentorship program for underprivileged youth. We need musicians who've lived, who understand that art comes from life, not just textbooks." Diana's smile deepened. "You'd be perfect." Jennings shifted beside her, clearing his throat. "Diana, surely there are younger candidates better suited." "With respect, Anton." Diana cut in smoothly. "I trust my own ears. And tonight, I heard something I haven't heard from any of your protégés." Jennings's face reddened, but he said nothing. Rose's heart fluttered wildly. A month ago, she'd been invisible, a widow in a quiet apartment, her violin gathering dust. Now, here she stood, being offered a place in shaping the future. Would you consider it? Diana pressed gently. Rose glanced at Sophie, who beamed proudly, then at Jennings, whose lips twisted into reluctant acknowledgement. Finally, she looked inward to the young girl who once dreamed of stages, the woman who'd once played for love, the widow who'd mourned in silence. Yes, she said softly but firmly. I'd be honored. Diana's smile widened. Oh, wonderful. Let's talk details next week. As Diana moved away to greet another guest, Jennings lingered, eyes cold, but grudgingly respectful. You proved me wrong tonight, Mrs. Mitchell, he said flatly. Enjoy it while it lasts. Rose met his gaze steadily. It's not about proving you wrong, Mr. Jennings. It's about proving myself right. Jennings gave a small, humorless chuckle. We'll see how long that sentiment carries you. Then he turned and disappeared into the crowd. Rose exhaled slowly. Sophie touched her arm. He'll never admit it, but you shook him tonight. Rose smiled faintly. I wasn't playing for him. They watched the guests mingling, the music drifting softly through the air. I was playing for Thomas, she murmured, hand brushing the locket at her neck. And for every version of myself who ever doubted I could. Sophie's eyes glistened. You're incredible. Rose. Rose squeezed her hand gently. No, dear. I'm just finally remembering who I've always been. A week later, Rose found herself standing before a row of folding chairs in a modest community center rehearsal room. Before her sat 12 students, some teenagers, some even younger clutching battered violins and cellos, their eyes wide with a mix of nerves and excitement. She set her violin case on a worn piano bench and smiled warmly. First things first, she began, voice steady but kind. There's no wrong note in this room. Only learning, only discovery. The tension in the room seemed to ease. A boy with a chipped viola lowered his defensive scowl. A shy girl with thick glasses peeked up hopefully from behind her music stand. Rose lifted her violin. Let's start with something simple. A single note. Just listen. She drew her bow across the strings, releasing a long, rich tone that filled the small space. This, she said softly, is more than sound. It's a voice. Your voice. And I want each of you to find yours. Tentative hands raised bows, one by one. The students played their notes wobbly, sharp, flat, but earnest. And Rose smiled after each one. That's it, she encouraged. That's where we begin. Hours passed in gentle repetition. Scales, short phrases, simple harmonies. But beneath the technical instruction, Rose weaved in stories of music as a refuge, a celebration, a bridge between hearts. The children listened, enraptured, absorbing more than finger positions and bowing techniques. They absorbed her. Why? During a break, Sophie peeked in from the hallway, carrying coffee. You're glowing, Sophie whispered, handing Rose the cup. Rose sipped gratefully. It feels right. Like I've been waiting to come back to this. I'm so proud of you, Sophie said earnestly. And Diana's thrilled. There's already talk of featuring your students at next season's gala. Rose's eyes widened. We've barely begun. Sophie grinned. Exactly. And they're already inspiring people. At that moment, A young boy named Mateo approached shyly. Mrs. Mitchell, my mom says we can't afford lessons, but can I still come? Rose knelt beside him. Mateo, as long as I'm teaching, this door stays open to you. Music belongs to everyone. His face lit up. I want to play like you someday. She smiled, brushing a curl from his forehead. You'll play like you someday, and that's even better. That evening, as Rose walked home beneath the amber glow of streetlights, her violin case felt lighter on her shoulder. The city hummed around her cars. Laughter, snippets of music drifting from apartment windows. She paused outside her building, looking up at her small window on the 3rd floor. For so long, it had felt like a box containing her grief. Aida tonight. It felt like a beacon. Inside, she set her case beside Thomas's photograph, as she always did. But instead of quiet solitude, she turned on the radio, letting classical music fill the space. She sat by the window, tea in hand, watching the city breathe below. For the first time in years, she felt the weight of loneliness lift, replaced by something new, a quiet purpose, a sense of belonging she hadn't dared hope for. And as Tchaikovsky's familiar concerto floated from the radio, Rose whispered to the night. The music never left. It was just waiting for me to listen again. Backstage, the atmosphere had shifted. Musicians and volunteers who had previously offered Florence little more than polite nods were now seeking her out, shaking her hand, praising her courage and artistry. For the first time in years, Florence wasn't just another quiet face in the crowd. She was the story everyone was telling. Sophie found her amid the chaos, her eyes shining with admiration. Florence, you owned that stage. I've never seen Maestro Jennings look so well speechless. Florence gave a quiet chuckle. I think I surprised him. She gently wiped the sweat from her brow, still feeling the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Maybe I surprised myself, too. Before Sophie could reply, Diana Fraser approached, this time with 2 other board members in tow. Mrs. Jenkins, Diana said warmly, your performance was a revelation. Truly. You reminded everyone here tonight that passion has no expiration date. The other board member, a silver-haired gentleman in a tailored navy suit, nodded enthusiastically. Absolutely. We're looking for mentors for our new youth music initiative. After what we witnessed tonight, we'd be honored if you'd consider leading a masterclass. Florence blinked, stunned. A masterclass, me. Why not you? Diana smiled. You've not only mastered the violin, Mrs. Jenkins. You've mastered resilience, grace, and storytelling through music. That's exactly what our students need. Florence felt an unfamiliar warmth rising in her chest. For so long, she'd believed her teaching days were behind her, her purpose wrapped up in the memories of chalkboards, elementary school recitals, and small applause. But now, here were doors reopening, inviting her to step forward, not backward. Would you think it over, Diana pressed gently. Florence looked at Sophie, who nodded encouragingly. I will, Florence said, her voice trembling slightly. Thank you. As Diana and the board members left to mingle with other performers, Sophie grinned. Florence, you're about to become a legend. I'm too old for legends? Florence laughed softly, but maybe not too old to leave a mark. At that moment, Anton Jennings reappeared. His expression was unreadable, a complicated blend of professional detachment and grudging respect. Mrs. "Jenkins," he said formally, extending his hand. "I underestimated you. I won't make that mistake again." Florence hesitated, then took his hand, feeling the weight of the moment. "Miss Jennings," she replied, evenly. "We all misjudge people sometimes." He held her gaze for a beat longer, then gave a slight nod before stepping away into the crowd. His pride perhaps dented, but his perception forever changed. As the evening wound down, Florence stood quietly in a corner of the theater, watching the bustle around her. She wasn't the headliner. She hadn't been the youngest, the fastest, or the flashiest performer of the night. But she had been seen, and for Florence Jenkins, that was enough. Her fingers traced the edge of her violin case, a soft smile playing at her lips. Tomorrow would bring decisions about teaching, about performing again, about embracing a future she'd thought was long behind her. But tonight was hers. A night where age didn't define her. A night where music spoke louder than prejudice. A night she'd carry in her heart forever. The next morning, sunlight streamed through Florence's window, dancing across the violin case resting proudly on her side table. For the first time in years, it wasn't gathering dust. It was a promise waiting to be fulfilled. Florence sat at the small kitchen table, a steaming cup of tea in hand, staring at the two pieces of paper before her. One was the official offer letter from the Winter Arts Foundation, inviting her to teach masterclasses and mentor young violinists. The other was a handwritten note from Sophie, which had been slipped into her bag after the performance. "You reminded me why I fell in love with music. Please don't stop now, Sophie." Florence traced her finger over Sophie's words, her heart swelling with a mixture of pride and humility. She'd walked onto that stage last night thinking it might be her final performance. Yet, somehow, it had become the beginning of something entirely new. Her phone buzzed. A message from Diana Fraser. "Mrs. Jenkins, no pressure. But the students are already asking when they'll get to meet you. We'd love to have you. Let me know." Florence smiled softly. She thought of the faces in the audience, the standing ovation, the hope she'd seen reflected back at her in young Sophie's eyes. And she thought of Thomas, how he used to close his eyes and hum along when she played, as if the music stitched the world together. She stood, walked over to the violin case, and opened it again. This time, her hands were steady. She lifted the instrument, placed it under her chin, and played a simple melody. Nothing grand, nothing technical. Just a tune she used to play in her classroom, one the children loved. As the final note faded into the morning light, she whispered to the empty room, "All right, Thomas. Let's teach them." With a quiet resolve, she picked up her phone and typed her reply to Diana. "I'd be honored. Let's inspire the next generation together." She hit send. Later that afternoon, Florence stood outside the community music center, violin case in hand. Inside, young students laughed, tuned their instruments, shuffled their sheet music nervously. Through the window, she spotted Sophie chatting excitedly with other young musicians. Florence took a deep breath. When she pushed open the doors, a few heads turned, some curious, some unsure. But Sophie's face lit up instantly. "She's here," Sophie called out. "Everyone, this is Mrs. Jenkins, the violinist I told you about." The room filled with whispers, wide-eyed stares, and then, slowly, smiles. Florence stepped forward, her voice warm but firm. "Let's make some music, shall we?" The students gathered around eagerly, their energy infectious. And in that moment, surrounded by fresh faces and bright hopes, Florence felt it not just the return of music, but the return of purpose. As she lifted her violin once more, she wasn't just playing for herself. She was playing for every student who'd ever been overlooked, every dream that had been deferred, every voice that had been silenced. And the music soared strong, joyful, undeniable. Some talents never fade, and some legacies, they're just getting started. If this story inspired you, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more tales that prove it's never too late to chase your dreams. Know someone like Florence Jenkins? Share their story in the comments. We'd love to celebrate them too.